Hey guys, what's up? Welcome to a new video. In this video we're going to follow on from a previous video, not from too long ago, which is regarding controller input. A previous video that I've mentioned is effectively what you can do is you can detect whether an input being received into your game is from a controller or from a mouse and keyboard, and it may update messages on the screen giving the user instructions for which controller or input type they are using. So for example, if I was using a mouse and keyboard, it would say press space to jump, whereas if you was to use a game controller, it might say press X or the A button to jump. Now, I made that video quite general, so you can try and mold it to many situations. But there are certain situations where people are having difficulty applying it to, and this video is basically just to cover that. I'm going to try and speed run some parts of it, but then I'll go into a bit more depth further on for these use cases. So I've just got a brand new first person scene here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to first create a user interface and just get this ready. So user widget. I'm going to call this WBP underscore input HUD. Open that up. So once that's open, I'm just going to tag it to the top. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a canvas panel, and then I'm going to add a text. So with my text selected, I'm going to change its anchor to the center of the screen. I'm going to set the position to 0 and the Y to 0. And what I'm also going to do is change the alignment to 0.5 and 0.5. And as you can see, that has centered my text perfectly in the middle of the screen. This will have two use cases, as you'll see later on, but we'll get to that as we get to it. So I'm going to change the text block to example text for now. I'm also going to I'm going to enable size to content. So the box changes size depending on what text is inside. And for now, that might be it. However, what we can do is we can also create the binding up front. So where your text content is here, we can press bind, create a binding. Basically what this does is it'll run this bit of code, this bit of blueprint to update the text in real time. So every time it sees a change, it'll run this constantly basically to look for changes and change that text. So I'm going to work backwards here similarly to how I did in the original video. I'm going to do a string to text. I'm going to do an append node to get different layers of text. My first box is going to be press open quotes. B is going to be the button that we're going to want to press, but we'll come to that. Add another pin. We're going to then close those quotations and then write 2. And then this is where we're just expanding a little bit. We're going to add another D, and we're going to leave this one blank because we're going to want to add in our unique sort of interaction message. So if it's jump or if it's interact or if it's talk, we can change that on the fly, but we'll get to that. Just before we continue, I just want to make sure that we add an extra space here at the end of 2, just so then this last addition is spaced correctly. From B, we want to go to a select node, and this select node is going to be based on a boolean. This boolean is basically going to be, is the key that's been pressed a gamepad? Yes or no? If true, write this message. If false, write this message. So in our case, it's going to be, if our gamepad is true, we want to put left trigger, for example. And if it's false, we might want to say space. Okay. Then what we can do from this index, we can promote this to a variable. And the variable name, I'm just going to change this to gamepad enabled. Okay. And then we'll set this later on. And then coming back to our D on our append, we're just going to drag off this and promote this to a variable also. And I'm going to change this to interact action. Interact action. Hit compile. Now I'm going to select this interact action and I'm going to say instance editable and expose on spawn, because I want to be able to access this variable from outside of this this HUD, this function. Same with gamepad, enabled boolean. Let's expose on spawn and instance editable. And for now, I think that should be about right. So let's compile that, and for now we'll leave this open. Now, the instance that, or the example that I was given was, what if I want an object in my world and when I approach it, it comes up with the message and changes on the fly. If I decide, now I'm stood in front of this door, for example, and I switch to a controller, the message needs to update live there and then. So I'm not going to do a door, I'm going to do something much simpler. I'm just going to create a blueprint and an actor, BP underscore radio. We're going to open up the radio. This is like a music radio. I'm going to hit add. I'm going to add a cube. With my cube selected, I'm going to change the scale down to 0.2, 0.1, 0.1. Just a nice little box. And change its colour to green, just so it stands out a little bit more. And I want to be able to approach this box, this radio, and then when I'm stood next to the radio, the message then appears. So for me to be able to detect me being stood next to it, I'm going to also add a box collision. So type in box and you get box collision. Add that, and I'm going to make it the default scene route. And now you can see that the box is around the radio, and that's absolutely fine. So hit compile. I'm going to go back to my map and I'm just going to add this to my game somewhere. So let's just put it on this box here. Let's just pop that there. Don't quite like the way that that's clipping inside like that, so I'm just going to bump the Z value up to 105. And yeah, that's pretty nice. If I walk next to that, it should do something. So let's just test to make sure our collision is working correctly. So let's go over to our event graph. And let's just get rid of all of these other nodes for now. Select our box collision, scroll down on the right hand side until you get to events, and we want both of the component begin overlap and end overlap. So we'll add that, go back to our box and then press end. So now we've got a begin and an end overlap event. Just to make sure that this box is working correctly, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cast to the first person character, so we can see here up at the top. The reason I'm doing this is because my character is the first person character, so if I overlap it and I'm able to cast to my character, that just kind of confirms that it was me, it was the first person character that does the overlapping. So other actor into this object. So if somebody else walks over this box, this cast will fail and my blueprint won't run any further, because I'm going to go from the succession, and just to test it, I'm going to do a print, spell it right, print string. Okay, and my print string is just going to say hello. So let's just test that, hit play, run over to my radio, and you can see in the top left hand corner of the screen, we're getting that hello. So I know that this is functioning nicely, so we can continue. So in this instance, what we want to do is when we approach the box, we want to display this message on the screen saying press E to interact, or press the X button on your control to interact. So we can do that because we've created our widget already. We can come off this this succeed node, and we can do create widget and select class. So ours is down here at the bottom, WPBP input HUD, and you may have noticed straight away is a gamepad enabled, and what's our action. So obviously we're inside our radio right now, so we might want to say the interaction is going to be to turn on. Yep, so when we walk over to this, it's going to say press whatever to turn it on. Now we can add to this actually. We can promote this to a variable, so false text, and let's drag true, promote to variable, true, text. So you can change these on the fly. Instance editable, expose on spawn, instance editable, expose on spawn, compile. Go back to our radio. We need to refresh this node, and you can see now we've got all of our inputs. So because they were set by default to space and left trigger, these have pulled through nicely, but you can overtype these if you like. So this is going to create the widget. We're going to say press space to turn it on, or press L trigger to turn it on. Depending on this gamepad enabled is true or false. Now, obviously we need to get some kind of input here of, is it the gamepad or is it the controller? Now, there's two ways we can do this. If you want it to be set when we walk into it, we can get a reference to it here. And by that, what I mean is, let's get our player controller, which handles all of our input. Get player controller. We actually need to cast to that. So we will do cast to player controller. I've just remembered this template doesn't come with a controller by default. So let's go to our first person folder, blueprints. Right click, create blueprint class, create a controller, BP underscore player controller. And that's fine. Go back to our radio, and now we can say cast to player controller. Whoops, sorry about that. Cast to player controller, which now exists. We only want to do this on event begin play. We don't want to do this multiple times. Let's just do it once. However, let's make a reference. So let's create a variable from this. So now we have a reference to our player controller all the time. Hit compile. From our player controller, we need to find out if a gamepad is enabled. But we don't have that yet, so let's create that. So let's go to our player controller, event graph, and it's really simple. Same as the original video. Event any key. Is the key that we've pressed a gamepad key? If this is true, so a branch. Whoops, let's move that up. So once any key is pressed, if it is a gamepad key, is true. Let's create a variable. So variables, add a variable, gamepad active. Let's set this to true. However, if the key we've pressed isn't a gamepad key and it's false, let's just duplicate this and untick it so it's false. Plug that into false. So now we've got a very quick check of, is the key that's been pressed gamepad or not. Go back to our radio. From our BP player controller, we can now type in gamepad active. So we can get that and we can plug that straight into that boolean like that. So what this is saying is, at the time of us overlapping this box, is the keys being pressed a gamepad? If that's true, these are the messages. Now, for this widget to display on screen, we need to add it to our viewport. But what's a good idea first is if we promote it to a variable, and we'll call this sort of input HUD. And I've just noticed, I do apologise, I've left my blueprints tab down at the bottom there and you couldn't quite see it. To be honest, what I should probably do is move my face all the way over here, and I can put that back. Okay, so input HUD, I've just renamed it, but it's effectively this. Once we've set it as a variable, let's just add that to viewport. And in theory, this should now work. One thing we should do, just to be safe, to make sure this doesn't stay on the screen forever, is let's just drag a reference to our input HUD. So get that. and we want to check if it's valid. Now, is valid with a question mark, that's an executable. So if it's valid, we want to remove from parent, which is going to be your screen. Plug that in. So the reason we do this is valid is because let's say this fails and doesn't actually create this HUD. This variable is going to be blank, so it's not going to be valid. And then this will throw an error because it'll try and speak to something it doesn't exist. So let's hit compile and play, and let's just run over to our box. So you can see there, press space to turn on. Now, bear with me a second, let me connect my controller. Okay, so my controller is activated, or at least it was. So now I'm using my controller. Let's run over to this box, and now it still says press space to turn on. Interesting, let's fix that. So access none, trying to read the property. I know what the issue is. So we created a player controller because this template didn't come with one by default, but I failed to set it to the active one. So to do that, we're going to press this drop down menu here, go to world override, go to player controller, and change it from the engine's default to the one we've just created. So BP player controller, hit play, and now if I run over with my mouse and keyboard, space to turn on, and then if I now switch to my controller, run over, press the L trigger to turn on. So that's working now, so you can see that it pops up on the screen. Yep, perfect. The only downside to this is when I turn around, obviously I'm still getting that message. You might not want that. So we can set that to, we can change this up a little bit. So I've covered some of the question. I'm just going to sort of add some bonus stuff on here. So that might be enough for the majority of people. When you approach something, you get a message on the screen. But it'd be nice if the message is sort of like, almost feels a part of this this object. Now, one thing I also want to discuss is when I run over here to this, now the message is on my screen. If I use my controller and move around, so I'm actually using controller input, so now it's changed to keyboard, but if I press spacebar, so I'm not pressing anything here as you can see, I'm pressing my spacebar, the message is still giving me a game controller. So I want to fix this issue first. If you've got that and that's a problem for you, what you can do is, because our player controller now has this sort of event running every time a key is pressed, what we can do is we can go to our HUD, and inside our event, our function for, where is it? So function get text. This is the one that's updating the message on the screen. Our gamepad enabled sort of like a local variable, and it's not really live. It's not updating from anything. What would be nice is if we can just get a direct link to the player controller, which updates really regularly. So let's just delete that for now. And what we want to do is go to our event graph. From our event construct, cast to player controller, which is our BP player controller. We then want to get player controller, make a reference to it so we don't have to cast to it multiple times, hit compile. Now we've got access to the player controller and its data. So what we can in fact do is we can come in here and we can say, one sec, my bad, let's just right click in this area here. Bear with me a sec, we've got a reference to this, so because I've separated my screen it's thrown me off a little bit, but because we've got that reference to our player controller now, we can drag this in. gamepad active. So get gamepad active and connect that in. So now this is going to update live based on what our player controller is seeing. So this is actually redundant now. So this is going to create, I mean, we can keep that, to be honest. It's not going to make any difference, but once it's created, it'll keep itself up to date. Let's hit play. I'm going to run over, so you can see that it says space, but then when I move my controller now, you can see that that's updating. And then when I press spacebar on the keyboard, you can see that's updated live. So that's one potential issue that I can see popping up. So how do we make it look a little bit nicer so it's kind of like, it feels like it's a part of the object rather than just floating around on the screen? So we do need to make quite a few changes, to be honest. The first one being in our radio. If we go to the viewport, I mean, we don't need to go to the viewport, but we're going to go to the viewport. We're going to add a widget. Whoops, widget. Now, that was weird. For whatever reason, that came up on the screen absolutely huge. So with our widget selected, what we're going to do is we're going to change the widget class to BP underscore input HUD. And you can see there that we've got example text. Which is fine. We're going to drag this up so it's going to be above our text. And I'm also going to rotate it around. I'm going to rotate it around so it faces forward. Okay, sweet. Okay, now obviously the size is very big. So what we can do is, we're just going to change this 300 by 300. Manually redraw. Wait a minute. Why won't this allow me, or draw a desired size? Why won't this let me update the thing? Okay, so it seems that I've just mixed a couple of things up here. So the actual draw size itself just limits the amount of characters that are visible on the screen. So we don't want to do that. But what we can do is we can change the scale. So we can knock that down to 0.5, so it's not as big. Or at 0.25, for example. Let's just move this back down a little bit, hit compile. Now, one thing that I've really not considered is, obviously the previous method allows you to add it to every object and type in the exact values that you want it to say. So for example, we could type in here that it's going to be turn on, space, and left trigger. Now, adding it as a widget, it doesn't appear to allow us to go into those variables, which is slightly more awkward. We can still work with it, but it is more, it's not as easy to just set up on the fly like this. So what we've got at the moment is, if we press play, you've got like this permanent message, press space. So you can see that that's sticking to the object, and then, you know, that might be the idea that you like. What you can do, if you want it to be on the screen, you can set it to screen space, hit compile, hit play, and you'll see now that it kind of like acts like a billboard, and it follows the object around, but it's always looking at you. So depending on which way you want this to work, you can have it set up like that. And you can see when I get close to it, the original one just pops up. But we're going to fix this, so don't worry about it. Now, firstly, what we want to do is I'm going to deactivate this create the original one. What we need to do is I'm going to move these out of the way. I'm not going to delete it. I'm just going to move it out of the way. And also for the end overlap, I'm just going to remove these nodes. Not remove them, but you know what I mean. Just move them out of the way. So that's that. Now, On the previous method, we needed to create the widget at the time we needed it. However, this widget is permanently there. So what we in fact need to do is we need to get a reference to this widget and say set visibility. Because it's always there, we want the visibility to be deactivated by default. So visibility, change this to visible false, so it's not visible. But when we walk over our box, we want it to become visible. So just tick this new visibility. We're going to want to do this again, but for the end overlap, but untick the box. So let's put that there, put that there. Whoops. Hit play. So firstly, we shouldn't see anything, but when we get close to it, you can now see that it's on the object. And you can see that it stays with the object now. So if I turn around, I can't see it. But if I turn back, it's there, which is a much better visual appearance. So all we need to do now is address the how to update it, because it wasn't changing in any way. So let's just... So we need to gain access to the data within inside this, but unfortunately it doesn't work as nice as you'd expect. You can't just go widget and sort of find the interact text. It doesn't exist. What you've got to do is from your widget, you've got to get user widget object, I think it is, yep. And then that allows you to then cast to your BP widget, and then as the widget, then we can gamepad enabled or true text. We can do that afterwards. This is why it's a little bit more annoying. However, it might be the visual appearance that you're after. So instead of doing the cast every time we walk into it, what's probably a better idea is similar to the controller. What we'll do is we'll cast to it once and set a reference to it. So let's cast to it once, promote to variable as our WBP input HUD. Now, what's the best way to do this? So knowing that this is going to be our radio, what we can do is right at event begin play, we know that our option is going to be listen, for example, or turn on. So what we can do is we can set our interact action. So we can set that right up front to... I'm going to change it to listen, so then you know that it's changed. So it should say the word listen instead. That's pretty much it for the. But at the... Oh, we also need to set the keys that we're going to press. So obviously, again, knowing that our radio is going to have sort of like a set key press. So we want true text. So is a gamepad enabled true? What button do I want to press for the gamepad? Let's just say the A button. A button. And then for false, so set false text. So if we're on a mouse and keyboard, what do we want this button to be? Let's say the E key. So we've set all those. That's absolutely fine. Let's hit compile. So the only thing that we've not got now is whether our gamepad is enabled or not. So before we set the visibility, I mean, to be honest, this should be handled by the player controller. So let's just test that. Let's just test that and see what happens before I start making changes for something we don't need to. So E to listen, so that's working fine. And if I move my mouse, if I move the gamepad, press the A button. So again, hit space, the key's now changed. So that's working absolutely as expected. So that's quite nice. So there we go, we can turn around, come back, and it still says that button, walk away, and it disappears. So actually, we don't need to do any more, and that's pretty much it. Okay, so there's been quite a lot of different options there, how I've built it out. So obviously we can go down the route of adding a widget to the screen and selecting that. But then we need to obviously set the information for these before the game plays, so in our event begin play. And then we just change the visibility of this widget to being on or off. Or the other option is we can create the widget only at the time we walk near the object, and then obviously remove it from the parent when we walk away from it. So you've got a couple of options there. I hope that helps, especially for the people that have contacted me about it. I hope this helps you out. I hope this is what you was after. And for those that didn't ask for it, I hope you've watched it this far. And if you have, I hope it's been useful. And I hope that's a lot of hopes, but I like to make sure that the videos that I'm posting are of some use to some people. If you did like it and it was useful for you, please consider giving me a like. If you want to see more videos when I do post, hit subscribe. And if any of my videos have been useful to you and you want to consider supporting the channel in any way, it does really help, because as life gets busier, sort of the motivation to post videos does drop. I'm not going to lie, it is hard to post videos sometimes. But a little motivation now and then doesn't hurt. So I appreciate anybody that already has, and anybody that might consider going forward, and that'd be really good. Obviously we've got channel memberships. You can just press join down below. It's not much, but it does really help, and it really does give you a jolt of motivation, let's say. But I appreciate everybody, even just for watching the videos, and if you've made it to the end of the video, again, really big thanks. But I'm just rambling at this point, so hope it helped. Thanks for watching. See you in another one.